Sofia and Kate and everybody. You've been a great reception. We've visited now 12 museums across Europe. This is our 12th museum that we're imaging all the ant types for. But I must say that we've been the best received here in Kyiv, so thank you.
Kyiv is the best city in the world.
We can say that now at today's, I like the temperature today, much better.
Have you been to San Francisco?
This is San Francisco weather. It's never hotter than this in San Francisco. Today I'd just like to share with you some of the work I do on my research, but also explaining why this project is important to ant research and biodiversity research, why we're imaging the types, why we've asked your help in doing that. And I just want to speak generally why I think insects, because there's so many entomologists here, and it's fascinating, why I think we have important contribution to make. Now, I just want to start off by saying that my dream is that we would know the name of every ant in the world. Like, just know them like we know birds. We'd know where they're from, their habitat, we'd know if they're introduced, we'd know if they're endangered, and not just know the name of the ant, but how that relates to human well-being and how we can actually use ants as a tool for monitoring the environment. Well, we have a long way to go, right? We've only discovered about 20% of all life on the planet, but I'm mostly concerned about ants. I really love ants. We've made better progress on ants. We've got about 50% of all ants species we estimate described. That still means there are many new ant species, even in Ukraine, to find. But for most people, they don't realize this. They only see ants when they enter their kitchen, uninvited. But people don't realize that actually ants are one of the most important actors in this ecological theater. Shakespeare once wrote that though she be little, she be fierce. And it's actually not just because they're numerous, it's because of their complex societies. Ants have evolved on a different dimension. It's actually that complex society that really makes them so interesting to study in terms of their behavior, but also in terms of how they've evolved and filled so many interesting niches. And therefore, as we realize as insect taxonomists, that nothing makes sense unless we understand insects. In other words, we can't go into a forest and say the forest is the trees. It's actually really, the biodiversity is about the insects. But who cares about that biodiversity? Even conservation groups almost never include insects in their planning. And when people go to a forest, they're often more interested in seeing the trees than they are the insects. Now, why is it important? You can explain to people that what we really want in life is really like a Dow Jones index to the environment. What if we could know so much about the environment? We could tell you, if you put that mine, or that road, or that city there, it will have this impact. But we are not even close to having a Dow Jones index to the environment. Once again, we've only discovered about 30% of life on this planet. And that concerns me, because there are few people that can be dropped into a forest and actually understand what's around them. And in a place like Madagascar, I wanted to go and actually see if we could systematically document the biodiversity in that country. So I've been working over the last 20 years in Madagascar, which is what we call the Malagasy region, surrounded by these islands like the Seychelles, the Mauritius, the Comores, the Europa. But also, next door in East Africa, Flavia and I spent 8 months last year living in Mozambique in the north. We've been able to sample in northern Mozambique now. We wanted to see if we could put together the story for ants and other insects for that region. So we want to start off, why Madagascar? Now, Madagascar is special in terms of conservation and biodiversity because of its geological history. It was once attached to East Africa, broke away with India about 120 million years ago, and then India broke away from Madagascar. India moved north, dropped the Seychelles, and hit Asia, forming the Himalayas. It's that long isolation that has resulted in unique life in Madagascar. You have all the primates are endemic to Madagascar. 136 lemur species found only in Madagascar. But even more surprising, if you came from Kenya and jumped over to Madagascar, you'd be surprised what you don't find. You don't find venomous snakes, you don't find elephants and ungulates, you don't find the pythons, which are found throughout Africa and Asia, but you find boas, which are found only in the neotropics. And you don't find the most dominant ants, the driver ants, the army ants, the weaver ants. They're completely absent. It's like we've given a chance to study evolution, a unique piece of the puzzle of life. And that's why Madagascar is interesting as a biologist. It gives us a kind of a second chance to see how life evolved. And in addition, Madagascar is like a continent that has rainforest in the east, dry forest in the west, and in the southwest you have this bizarre spiny bush forest, these Dr. Seuss plants that are found only in Madagascar. Now people arrived, surprisingly, very recently. We estimate it's around 2,500 years ago people arrived in Madagascar. That means these large birds, like the Apiornis, the largest bird, was actually alive, but 500 years ago. So humans were around when these large creatures were there. So Madagascar began a dramatic change with colonization, hunting the large prey like the birds. They brought rice cultivation from Asia, leaving massive deforestation, but 10% of the habitat is left. Now each of those little patches that are left are special. You walk into them and there's life. And it's amazing how they persisted in these small patches. And our question was, what if we could preserve some of those patches? Which patches should we preserve? Can we use insect data to actually decide which of those patches are more valuable in terms of biodiversity? Now why insects are interesting is because humans, often in these small patches, have killed all the lemurs. You may only find introduced rats, all the native vertebrates, but the insects are all there. And that's why I think it's important to go to these small patches. I've only found this happen in Africa, in Madagascar, where these small patches still have the native millipedes, the native scorpions, the native ants. They persist in these small remnant forests. So we designed a study where we visit in a very systematic way those patches of forest. We would sample based on the climate, so the rainforest to the driest areas. Along the coast you have the you have 12-month dry season here and very wet over here, raining up to 4 meters of rain in the northeast. And then based on soil. So basic, where you would find different plants, you would find different insects, so we designed a study. And we organized 350 localities. We would visit in Madagascar and do a standardized protocol of collection of basic entomological tools. So in fact, I designed this leaf litter technique and a standardized transect of taking 50 samples through the rainforest. We'd have beating vegetation, we'd have pitfall traps, loads of malaise traps, and we'd also have baiting for butterflies, yellow pan traps, general collecting we call it, or hen collecting. And we did this consistently across all 350 sites in Madagascar. Now, on the computer, it's really easy to design those exact sites. We want to visit rainforest on crystal. We want to visit rainforest on basalt. We want to visit in the dry forest. But then to get there often took longer than actually the field work itself. So this is where the adventure, in fact, field work is the greatest adventure on Earth. You don't need to go to Mars. You just need to go to a rainforest site. And the infrastructure in Madagascar is basically non-existent. We work in the rainy season. This may be a small stream in the dry season in the west, but in the rainy season, which is when the forest is alive, is when it becomes fascinating to be a biologist there, but also extremely difficult to get your vehicles there. So we actually have spent a lot of our time learning how to, I don't recommend doing this with your vehicle, but actually it does work. These Toyota Land Cruisers are amazing. And we've had exciting trips with French biologists who have taken us to remote forest patches to get in there, into the canopy using what's called a radeau de cime. And this is interesting, it's like a big balloon with a mesh in between. You drop it and then you jump down and you live up there and you're in the canopy. And it's really a desert environment. It's hot, it's miserable, but there's different ants up there, so you have to do it. But as you know, insects are easy to collect, right? So you have to be efficient, and our methods were tested to capture the most diversity for the fewest specimens. But there's a problem with a lot of large-scale biological inventory projects is how to manage the processing. So entomology didn't really exist in Madagascar. There is no Department of Entomology or National Museum. So we basically decided to create it from scratch. So we held courses, training programs, and over time we brought them to the United States. They now have gone to masters, PhD, and we have a core team of people that we process specimens. And this large team actually needed a home, a national collection. So with time, I built a museum there. We call it the Biodiversity Center. And here it is. We've now our solar energy off-grid. And we have 2 floors of classrooms where we teach here. And we have 2 floors of research. And if you want to visit, you can stay in our research facilities up here. We're located in the National Zoo. So it's you can wake up to lemurs. And it's actually nice. And it now houses the national collection of insects there. And we created this center with this goal is to basically give a voice for insects at all levels, which is non-existent. A voice of insects in research, when they're designing permit processes to make sure insects still can be included easily, to actually work with the government in terms of education. We're sponsored by the Ministry of Education, but also to actually promote insects into popular culture and also tourism. And I'll mention at the end some of our new programs in terms of insect farming for food. But in my idea was that, of course, everybody would love to have insects from Madagascar to do research, right? So our team in Madagascar processed all the insects down to a particular level. Hymenoptera was to family, beetles was to family, Odonata was just to Odonata, and we'd ship them out to 180 taxonomists around the world. And this is me leaving Madagascar with that year's harvest that's been collected the year prior, processed through the year, and then shipped off to taxonomists around the world. And that's been going on since, at this scale, since 2001. Probably one of the largest tropical biological inventories of insects. The problem with this model is that entomologists, maybe unlike botanists, we're not very good collaborators, as it turns out. Botanists have a history of always working together. They produce florists. But entomologists don't have a history of creating these books, this Entomofauna of Madagascar series, for example. It's just not part of what we do. So we ship insects to taxonomists, and the years go by, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and we don't really have much in terms of taking back to Madagascar to say, this is the solution to where we should preserve insects, or these are the biodiversity patterns in Madagascar. And that's really a challenge that I wanted to think about and address. And as an ant researcher, I felt I needed to figure out how to do it first with ants. So I just want to take a break here and tell you how I've been addressing this problem with ants. And I think it's part of a problem of how underfunded entomology has been. Like, so few people with such a vast project, insects, but also a history of how we can actually capitalize on new technology and how we can make a team. And that's the challenge. How do you make entomologists feel they're part of a team? So we began by training the next generation. We started this program of teaching a course in Madagascar of entomology, specifically these groups that we decided upon. One is the ants. And I taught the course in Madagascar, and I started teaching this international course called Ant Course that travels the world, and we teach 30 to 35 students around the world. For the last 16 years, we've taught this course from Borneo to Peru to Uganda, all over the world, in fact. It's a fabulous experience, trying to train them. And we realized that we had to somehow put online all this knowledge we have about entomology. To identify an ant in Madagascar, nobody in Madagascar could do it, because nobody would have the funds to travel and find all the types to compare. In fact, we don't even know where the types are. We don't have access to the literature. We don't have access to even the keys. So to actually democratize this, we started this project called AntWeb. And that is basically turning a museum into a virtual museum, but also trying to develop tools to curate it, and by emphasizing types. So if you haven't had a chance, check out AntWeb, and this is where all the images we take here will show up. And our goal is to have an image of every species, including the image of the type of that species. So we've imaged 50,000 specimens so far, over 200,000 images are on AntWeb. We have a database of specimens of over 600,000, but it's growing, and we estimate we'll image 700 specimens here, so that'll be an important contribution. In a sense, the Kiev ant collection will be online when our project is finished. Now, imaging technology has advanced. We started this project in 2001 in San Francisco, where we held a competition with industry and microscope companies to actually develop a software to actually image ants. So this is what you saw in a microscope, but using technology where we would image, as you've seen, stacks of images, you would slowly get into a focused image. We first started working with a company called Automontage. Then they were incorporated into Leica system. Then with Leica we designed lighting systems, and now you can buy a complete system in Leica. This is Prima Pelta from Madagascar. I think it's Seychellensis. So this technology has really allowed us to kind of compete with birds, right? So now, or pictures of cats on the internet. And everybody loves pictures of cats. Well, now we can look at ant pictures instead. And sister to the museum, we needed a catalog. So we started what's called Ant Cat. And this is where we manage names. We have all the catalog of ants, building on the work of Barry Bolton and others. We've had all the literature, all of it, scanned in, and we have access to the original PDFs. We have access to the up-to-date. It's done by a community. The taxonomists log on and keep it updated. So we use this as a name management system behind AntWeb. So when people upload specimen data or museum data, we update it to the current valid names when it's updated, or alert you when you haven't got the correct name. And we check all these things. So that's how we maintain a vetted system for ants online. And this is just the taxonomic infrastructure that's needed to allow somebody in Madagascar to enter the field of taxonomy. And this is really the goal, and that also means when I'm in San Francisco, I can access the collection here in the sense of the types. I can't stress how important this is. So this was a mistake. This is just a recent a book that also kind of democratizes or competes with bird books. We have our first of a series of books on the ant genera of biogeographic regions, and this is the one on Africa and Madagascar. And there's a copy upstairs if you want to look at it with Dr. Machenko. And in Madagascar, we have been making progress with the team, and this is the species that Flavia described, Stigmatoma rahodi. There's 420 species we've described of ants alone in Madagascar since 2000. That's not bad, but still, that's less than half the species described. At the current rate, it'll still take us another 15 years to describe all the ant species in Madagascar. And we've given nothing in terms of contribution. We kept saying, we'll describe species and then we'll do conservation in Madagascar. But at this rate, I'm beginning to wonder what forest will be left in 15 years. So we have to find a new strategy. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But we do have lots of great data. We write papers about diversity patterns, where's the most species-rich habitat. Of course, you may have guessed what it's humid forest is the most diverse habitat. This is comparing arboreal and ground nesting species. We have about 95% of the species are endemic to Madagascar. And I said we estimate about 1,200 species are there. When I first got to Madagascar, there was less than 300 species described. So there's been a great augmentation in species. If you look at patterns of diversity across the island, this is just all the data combined. You see that there's a peak of diversity at about 450 to 600 meters in elevation, which is interesting. Not sure why that's happening. A lot of hypotheses about patterns of diversity. But this is a rich, unique world where we have complete coverage of all species across all habitats. You can really mine it for really interesting data on ecology and biodiversity patterns, the evolution of species turnover. And our current project, funded by the National Science Foundation, is to sequence each species using next-gen sequencing called UCE, ultra-conserved elements, and we'll get 2,500 loci for each species, and we'll use it to look at patterns of phylogenetic diversity across habitat, across community phylogenetics patterns, and it's very exciting to do that. But still, this kind of academic approach does not have any direct relevance to actually how do we stop the destruction in Madagascar. This is just some of the examples we have of using community phylogenetics to look at community structure in a phylogenetic context across habitat and strata, from canopy to lowland. So this is kind of the current project we're working on. When you go to Madagascar, you are first surprised not by its diversity and bizarre animals, because all you see is this. When you're driving through Madagascar, you just see destruction. And then you go into this forest. It's like walking through a curtain into this wonderful world. And you live in it, you're doing research, and then you come out, and you see this again. And you're so saddened by what's happening, and you see it, that this is just a patch of forest. We must be able to do something. And I wanted to start thinking about, is there something we can do? My initial idea of waiting until I've described species, to all my 180 collaborating taxonomists have done something, that we would have a solution or understanding of priorities for Madagascar. We have made great contributions to science, but I feel that we have not made great contributions to Madagascar in terms of preserving that forest. So the big question is, we see forest now, but in 50 years, how much forest will be left? I can't imagine any forest will be left in 50 years in Madagascar if we don't do something different. Who's saving the forest? Well, it's not an entomologist. And I ask myself, why are we sitting on the sidelines? In the southwest of Madagascar right now, there's an incredible 5-year famine. And this large flowing river is the only river that has any water at all in it. And we spent last year, or the year before, working there, and it's a shame. We're down there like extracting ants for our pleasure of academics rather than actually thinking about what we can do down there. And it's actually really important, right? Madagascar's population doubled in the last 25 years since I've been working there. It will double in the next 30 years. And what's the problem? We're going to have more people. But who's going to feed that people? Well, that is happening right now in Madagascar. So what are they going to actually do? You cannot tell people who are hungry to stop cutting down the forest, because if they cut down the forest, they can grow something for 3 years. Yes, in 3 years, they have to go and cut down more forest. But how can you tell them to stop? So the real issue is you have to start working with people. And that's the challenge. But I think we can do something different as a team if we start to work together. So right now in Madagascar, we've kind of haphazardly chose groups to work on. We chose whatever you're interested in, do a little bit of work, do a little butterfly work, do a little dragonfly work, but nobody's completed the picture for any group at all. So we decided, well, let's start working differently as entomologists. So I formed a group last year called Insects and People of Madagascar. And I wanted to ask those 180 taxonomists, do you want to actually work differently in Madagascar? Who wants to actually not just do some of butterflies or some of the Odonata, but actually do a comprehensive picture of diversity of Madagascar? In other words, work together, let's complete something as entomologists so that we can have an understanding of patterns of diversity. So we formed a group, and now we are using that group of entomologists to design key biodiversity areas for Madagascar. We're using this specified groups for mining companies, for developing mining tools, for monitoring, restoration, and looking at invasive species. So this type group is just starting, but we actually are a very enthusiastic group. So we actually are focusing not on conservation, but on tools to understand the problem. What is the biodiversity patterns? At the same time, we have funding from the EU to actually start databasing the collections in Madagascar, which I think is important for this tool development. And we teamed up with 5 other African museums, and we're databasing their entomology collection there too, as part of this EU-funded Atlas project. And we are publishing kind of popular books on this amazing insects of Madagascar. Tourists go to the forest,
Fantastic.
and you're only lucky to see a lemur, but you'll always see insects, and they should be more prominent. I mean, the most common boring insect along the side of the road is the giraffe weevil. It's like so beautiful, right? And it's everywhere, but nobody stops to look at it, but they should. It has this amazing behavior of rolling up the leaf and guarding it, and it's amazing stories. So here's developing this idea of insect tourism. But also, we have to figure out a way to deal with this, what I call breakfast before conservation. And it took me a while to realize that the solution did involve insects. And I don't know why I didn't see it before, but in the markets across Madagascar, I've seen this. In fact, even just next to our center, one of the largest markets in the capital sells insects to eat, but I just ignored that. I didn't think it was exciting. But I realized that Madagascar has an incredible history of eating insects. In fact, the early literature pointed out that an amazing observation that Madagascar was the only country they visited where nobody was hungry. Because the travelers between 1880 and 1930 commented that they would even stop conflicts between villages. They would stop the war if there was a locust outbreak nearby. Because they would gather up all the locusts, dry them, or boil them, then dry them, then pound them into a powder. And they would add that powder during the year where they didn't have crops. And insect was a major component. But as the culture changes, they started spraying the locusts so they couldn't eat them, that they lost this in the capitals, in the larger cities. But it still was there. And I just wanted to take a side point that I should have thought of this earlier because it was in the back of my mind. I had this idea of doing a big ant exhibit in San Francisco. And a few years ago I used a vacuum cleaner and sucked up an army ant colony. I brought 250,000 live ants to San Francisco, and we had them on display at the museum for 1 year. They ran around, we had to feed them. And I was worried about trying to feed them. They eat a lot. So I called up a cricket farm and I said, hey, I need to buy crickets every day. I need crickets. 1 day without crickets and it's dead, the colony. And I said, I want to order 25,000 crickets a day. And they said, no problem. And I said, what? No problem? I said, yeah, that's a small order. I mean, that's a small order? Who is ordering crickets? They said, fish farms, pet companies. And I said, that's a small, I said, who is rearing all these crickets? But I didn't realize at that point, that was what's going to happen is you can rear insects, commercial scale, for feeding. And that was before this famous book came out about entomophagy. This is before the EU started forcing companies to buy insect protein. And this is before I met Darren, who was a cricket farmer, selling for the pet trade. And he too figured out that he could commercialize by using new technology, what he called, this is called the cricket condo. And this is one of the largest companies that makes insect protein for food in Canada. And I formed this team with Darren and others, and we now have launched an insect farming program in Madagascar. Now, insects are actually ideal. One, historically, Madagascar used insects. Two, it just is right for the environment. Anybody can start growing crickets or silkworms on a small scale. It's good for the environment. As we know, insects have a small footprint. That's a joke in English, but it doesn't work still. And more importantly, the nutrients are available to especially children to fight malnutrition. They've shown that you can get more protein from insects than you can from a steak. And as I said, historically it was very important. The last queen of Madagascar, who was in the capital, she had two specialized cooks that just cooked the queen's royal family insects. So quite recently, they cherished insects. And the two most important ones were the silkworm and the locust. And we're going to use crickets. And this is interesting, this concept of the locust. In the southwest of Madagascar, where they're having a famine right now, the BBC goes and films it, the locust outbreaks, and claims, oh my gosh, what a plague. We need to kill all these insects. Well, actually, the locals would get more protein from eating the insects than they would from the crops that they're growing. So even the Western idea of locusts is wrong, that we should be thinking that as an incredible vibrance of life for eating. So in Madagascar, we're doing two projects now, one on the silkworm, which is interesting because it's used also to produce silk for their funerals. So they have a tradition of growing the silkworm to make silk for their weaving, for their funerals, but also they eat the pupa. But they do it in a very simplified way that hasn't been really scaled up for commercialization. They still do it outside, but there's lots of parasitoids, where they lose half for birds, they lose the silkworms. So we're going to start doing it inside, using the technology of creating paste from the host plant leaves. We're going to farm the leaves by growing trees and reforestation. So there's good for the forest. And this is just a picture from right next to our center of the silkworm larva, right there being sold. And I didn't even realize it under my nose that they're still selling it right in the capital. So even in the capital, you can actually buy this. But we want to actually make a protein powder and use it as a supplement for the rice in their porridge, especially for fighting malnutrition in the kids. So here's the picture of the new team. It includes your colleague from SKYPE, who's there.
In the middle.
Filming right there. And he's actually one of our great leaders in training for how to rear the crickets. And we are doing trials. We want to make sure we're using native insects. So now we're testing different trials of what native insects to use and to actually test them and whether or not they can be perceived or... Some of these traditions are very localized, but we want to know how widespread they could be across Madagascar. So in the end, we want to only choose about 2 or 3 insects that we want to mass scale up. And soon, we're going to hopefully go, if the funding comes through in August, we'll be able to move into factory level production of these insects. And once again, for the silkworm, it requires a host tree. That means planting the host tree. And this is the group we want to work with to actually do the reforestation of the host trees for the silkworm. Now, You may think, this is just for Madagascar. I never considered eating insects. We have lots of food here in Kiev, right? But actually, you know, it's a world problem. It's going to come to us here in our Western worlds before we know it. And some people think that maybe there's just plan B, right? We're going to go to Mars. But I can guarantee you, if we do go to Mars, one, we know that they're going to grow potatoes there. You saw that movie, Mars. But they're also, I bet, in terms of insects, in terms of protein, they'll be growing insects. So there's no reason to think about waiting to go to Mars. You might as well start eating insects here. It's a choice we could make here. But in a place like Madagascar, there's no choice. They're going to have to figure out how to be more sustainable. Or else very soon, they're going to lose all their forest. And I don't know how that society will continue. So for Madagascar, the insects are calling now. But you have some time, but do consider it. And I just want to thank you again for being such a wonderful host. And we've greatly enjoyed speaking with all of you. And if you have any interest in learning more about any of this, you can find us on the 4th floor. So thank you.
And probably introduce yourself when you ask him so he knows what kind of field your expertise is.
Or if you're shy, you can find me later.
Yeah, so we are.
Hi, I'm Flavia.
Well, actually, it's my mistake. I haven't introduced Flavia, who's well, probably you introduce yourself quickly for the people. I was just in a hurry to introduce Brian, and I just forgot to introduce his beautiful assistant.
You're not gentleman.
Yeah, for sure.
I study at Brian, you say that before they ate insects in Madagascar. So it seems that I think eating insects, it's important for everyone, and for Madagascar too, because it's getting dry and soon they already have no food. But do you think that it will solve the conservation problem in Madagascar, even more because it's just a pounder, they like their meat? I think, in my point of view, like elsewhere, the problem is overpopulation.
So the comment was, well, will anything help Madagascar? Like you have population going up, is it just pointless? Well, I think as an entomologist, I see what could be helpful. So that's why I want to make a contribution in that direction. It's not the answer. It's, it could be the answer maybe if it really was scaled up, but I don't think that's even possible. But I think we can make a contribution, especially in Madagascar, because we're going back to something that was recently part of their culture, an important part of their culture, more so than in other areas like.
And what is population?
The population now is 34 million, but it's interesting.
40 million.
34 million. 34 million.
34.
Yeah. But what's interesting about that is that,
30.
you know, 30 years ago,
What is territory?
there was 7 million people there, or 40 million. There were 7 million people there,
What less than in Ukraine?
and there were at that time 4 million people that were hungry.
What is territory, size, territory of Madagascar? How many square kilometers?
It's all of California and all of Oregon and all of Seattle. What does that mean? Like a half of Ukraine, I guess.
We'll check in internet, no problem.
Flavia, would you let me to develop your question to some extent, Brian? Brian, you suggest a way of natural protection for Africa in working with people, explaining people, and providing people with new technology, especially in consumption of the environment, like switching maybe from cattle farming to insect farming or so. But correct me if I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but I believe I'm not. You will know what I mean. I think there is only one solution for Africa and probably the whole world to protect environment, and particularly local solution for Africa. You will understand what I mean. Like the best nature conservation situation now in Congo. It used to be good in Uganda some years before, in the time when Idi Amin was there. there are some patches which are still protected in areas of Mali, but not in Senegal. So you understand what I think the best for natural protection around?
War?
War.
It's not war, no, but like in Mozambique, they have 35 years of civil war, but the people impoverished and starving, they killed all the animals.
But
All the animals, there is nothing in
But it's
Mozambique,
civil
just
war,
coming back.
not neighboring countries involved. When they
But
insist,
actually, I have a, there's new data on that, Flavia. I don't think you're considering. The Civil
I
War
think
kept
war
out the
is good
Chinese,
because it's Jewish
and now the
population
Chinese have moved in,
is there.
and there's nothing left. I mean, the Civil War killed the large animals, but left all the trees in Mozambique. So repopulation was actually very quick after the Civil War stopped over the last 10 years. But now, over the last 5 years, when the Chinese moved in, they've killed 10,000 elephants in northern Mozambique like that. Now they just are completely logging all of northern Mozambique.
there was
If there was Civil
probably
War there, I bet they would not be there.
devastating for Big Five, for everything what provides quick meat. But what it prevents, it's not only prevents deduction of population, but it prevents industrial development and agricultural development. You do not grow anything if you are not sure whether you will stay in this place next time. For sure you can kill animal, cook it and eat, but you do not invest anything in future. And investment in future and political and social stability, this is what kills nature. So, well, for sure, let's pretend I didn't say, so maybe like when working with people in Madagascar, instead of environmental education, you have to try to make work with tribes. You have to say, you are better than you, and like, well, I didn't say so, but I believe it is the only way.
Well, I think it's, it's systems that have to change. The system is now, there's a growing exploitation of the system in terms of like, now that the Chinese came in, it's a rosewood trade, which has devastated the remaining forest that was being protected. You could not protect it from rosewood, one of the most expensive woods in the world, where one container is worth $30 million. In Madagascar, that's unheard of money. That's more than gold. It's just incredible amount. Nothing could stop that trade. It's like the ivory trade. Nothing can stop that. It's too valuable. So it can corrupt any system. And that system completely corrupted the protection system. So we had a nice system for protecting some forest, but that was completely ruined by the rosewood trade. Now rosewood is disappearing, so they're just exploiting something else. But the actual hunger side of things is another problem that I don't think goes away with war, that they're going to be hungry still. And it's not like Madagascar cut down all its forest by big machines. No, it's by machetes and humans who did it all. So, and they're whittled it down to little patches, and if they don't need that forest, it's going to be gone. So how do you make them need that forest? And
Tourism.
tourism can go everywhere, but if that is the only place that your food is growing, could be.
Maybe there is another way, which is sort of mixture of what we say, like what Flavia says, tourism, and what I say, war. It's like paying rangers. Like you pay part of population to fight with another part of population. So you pay rangers to protect the natural reserve from their brothers. And we know for Africa that brothers hate brothers much more than whites. So, Victor, you chopped it from video.
But I think those things could be competed against rosewood. It's so much money. It breaks down every system. Cocaine, those things are so out of realm in terms of price points that they ruin it. And it's a sad thing for Madagascar that all this incredible investment.
But for cocaine, they need forest, yeah, to hide
clear it,
plantation.
to hide it, yeah.
Yeah, so cocaine is not a big problem.
But
I have a question. You told quite a lot about your Biodiversity Center in Madagascar, but it seems so that you are the first director of this center, and there are not so many people from America who are coming to Madagascar to make research in zoology and biology and botany. And who are other people from other countries who are working in Madagascar now? From France, Italy, I don't know. Can you say other researchers who are working over there?
Yeah, so in Madagascar there's kind of a large botany programs. There's one very large one, or maybe two, the Kyiv Botanical Garden. That's a program there, and the Missouri Botanical Garden. And there's local botany institutions that are doing work. They have a long history because of the French who started a large, really detailed program in botany. Big teams on the floor of Madagascar is very well done. And then the zoologist, the Field Museum has a program there. They have an NGO too called Vatra. And everybody's has fought over what lemurs to study. You know, they're like the war. They fight amongst each other. And then there's the herpetologists who fight over what patch of forest. Every patch of forest has a new frog species in it, so they're always fighting each other over there. But entomologist doesn't really have anybody but us. And we facilitate others who want to come and do research there. We took the approach that any research on entomology is good for Madagascar, so we facilitate logistics, permits, housing, and we have a lot of Europeans who are working there. We have a summer intern program. We have 5 people from the museum in Rome who are actually spending 4 weeks at our program, so it's a great, we offer it as a training program in entomology, so they learn how to actually work in a museum. It's actually a great experience for them, and we get free work from them when they come, and they have to actually pay to do this, so it's good for the center. The center, as you know, entomology does not pay. We had this dream that we could make a living off doing consulting, and then the mining industry tanked 2 years ago, and all those contracts dried up. So we tried various things. We survived off getting grants, and we have the grant from the EU for managing this Atlas project where we're managing the museum digitization. We have the grant to be insect farming. If we get our next grant, even better. We survive off this intern program for people who come and pay very little, but it helps us keep the building going. And then I spend a lot of my time traveling, giving talks in the United States, looking for money to fund the center. So if you're anybody interested, we can talk about how ways to get your research involved in Madagascar.
One more question. Brian, tell me please, Madagascar is a very famous place. Is there any, are there any initiatives to find places where we can renovate the natural habitats? You told that only 10% of natural habitats are left. Maybe, did you do some maybe GIS modeling? You have such huge database now, put your data in a model and find places where you can renovate forests, so maybe you can propose some conservation initiatives in some places.
Yeah, and interesting question. So there's a lot of interesting science that you can do in these very applied aspects. And that's what I think is a surprise to me. I never wanted to do the applied because I thought it was not as good science as the other stuff. So reforestation, incredible topic for Madagascar because nobody's figured it out. Botanists have been working for years to figure out how to reforest forests. They can do it in Peru, they can do it in the Congo, they can't do it in Madagascar and they don't know why. So mining companies have mandated that they will reforest their land. They have lots of money. They have spent more money on reforestation projects than any other public reforestation research program in the world, but it still hasn't worked yet. And combination
have you seen any reforestation areas?
I've seen failed. They haven't, most of the time, most areas have like pioneer plants, we call them, that they can grow and start off. Madagascar doesn't have that. And after you destroy the land, it's like the mycorrhiza can't be regenerated. And I'm convinced it's the underground mycorrhiza that's the problem. But, 10 years go by and the plants are still this tall and nothing's growing.
But in every type of soil, or just in areas that lost the topsoil because of mining? Because if it's dead, it's a different story, right?
Well, in mining, they save the topsoil in different conditions, different depths, add nutrients to it, and they can't seem to put it back to life. It's amazing. The same companies that have great projects in Australia, Brazil, Gabon, and then they go to Madagascar and they hire all the same consultants and for 10 years they can't do anything. It's a failure. Reforestation doesn't happen. You can plant pine trees in Madagascar for some reason, but you can't plant a native thing. But for reforestation of insects, nobody's really looked at that at all. But I actually wanted to mention that we're inventorying the edible insects of Madagascar. There's about 50 species so far that we've looked at. That half of them are named. The silkworm is 25 species, probably all undescribed. It's just amazingly unknown. Like, it should have been the first group we looked at, right? It should have been, it's in the markets, but, so that's what we're doing now. Like, the most obvious question we should have done in the beginning, gone to the markets, what are you guys eating? You know, what's the host plant? Let's collect the host plant, let's collect the insect. We're barcoding them all now. And we're creating a database of, we call it an edible insect knowledge base. And we want to expand it to the world eventually, but we're doing it first in Madagascar. All the crickets we're growing, we have no idea what genus they are yet.
I can add a little bit because I know mine rehabilitation situation in South Africa, and I was working actually in that program. And rehabilitation, which precedes reforestation, it's like quite complicated approach. And it's not just on the empty land. You can put the plant and it will grow same as in nature. For sure, it will for many years it will be short and it will eventually dry because it's necessary to make sort of crop rotation, to put like legumes to provide nutrition and then mycorrhiza and so on and so on. And the main problem that rehabilitation and reforestation has these two issues. They have two main social enemies. They are green companies and NGOs. Yes, environmental NGOs. Both, first are corrupt, second are stupid. And they do the same. First, the commercial rehabilitation programs, what they do, they generally collaborate with mining companies, and what they do, they grow something what is not suitable for these areas. For example, for big mining areas, they start growing grass. Grass dries, then rain moves it off, and then new job for company for each year. Instead of growing native plants, which will be grown once, and then, but they try to, people from university who spend years and years in this business, they know that it's necessary to maintain technology to keep territory rehabilitated to a certain extent. But commercial producers, they are not interested in long-term results. They are interested in every year work. So they provide superficial green grass coverage, which will be gone next time. So next time they have a new order, and for sure they pay something for the company. So end company and these service providers, they don't need experts. So as an expert, you can see these areas which are absolutely wrongly managed. You can come to the managers, you can make public awareness, and they will try to avoid you because this is their own business. And then NGOs. NGOs, I don't know why, but many European NGOs working in Africa, they think that reforestation is growing pine trees and eucalypts. So instead of indigenous plants, they see empty areas, they get financial support from some kind of Peace Corps, whatever, human rights organizations which are far away from environmental activity, but unfortunately in Europe and also in States there is tradition to link like human rights protection and environmental protection, and even high managers who are dealing with environmental programs, they on the ground could be political journalists or human rights activists, and they also think that the best way to reforestate area just to grow alien plants like pine trees or eucalypt trees. They grow quickly, but it's just desert under them. And it also takes time and effort to explain them that it's necessary to grow local indigenous plants, but it's necessary to provide nursery, to invest costs to grow in these indigenous plants which are growing not that easy as pines. So they prefer short project, and to show that this year it was empty, next year there are pines. We have done job. Despite it's much worse than it would be empty.
Это уже новый доклад.
That's discussion.
How open are the locals to the conservation and reforestation ideas?
I think they're interested in trees. They all love trees, but whether or not that village will let the trees grow all the way up before they're cut for firewood or whatever is a challenge. So there are some trees they'll appreciate if, for example, it's a host plant for something they want. But still, it's been a challenge for even pine plantations, letting even the pine plantation grow high enough before it's cut down. So it has to be guarded, basically. So if you're going to grow a forest, it has to be guarded. In fact, in Madagascar, you could probably put a probability of or price tag on any tree you see. The only trees that will not be cut down are the ones that you have to climb a mountain and it's stuck off a rock. You know that one will be there next year. But if it's not, with time, the people move up the hill. They keep cutting. They keep cutting.
What about landmines?
There's no landmines. Yeah, landmines.
Oh gosh. Poor people.
But trees will grow forever.
That's true.
How easy is it to establish a new natural reserve or protection area?
So we've been able to work with groups, and it's going to get harder. But right now, the government wanted to triple the number of protected areas. But they've been really open to that, looking at biodiversity data, looking at proposals based on inventories of why this area should be preserved. It's done on paper, and then they ask NGOs to take over those paper reserves and manage them. And we've thought about managing a few reserves, but have been hesitant because don't really have that skill set, or we're based in the capital and don't want to actually manage a reserve 1,000 kilometers away. But we sometimes think maybe we should have done that, but we haven't yet. But insect farming, I think, is how we can make a contribution. So we're working with NGOs now that are based on these local reserves. And those pictures of barbecuing is actually one of those NGOs who are based in a reserve. And we're working with them. So
Is it local NGOs or international NGOs?
local NGOs.